Hello, everybody. This is James, and I am with DM Dix to talk about
Hey,
suspense and horror in RPGs. How's it going, Dix?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, man, I'm doing okay. It was a rainy morning here in Chicago, but it's kind of clearing up. Birds are
Yeah,
chirping, sirens are going by. It'll be a great stream.
nice. It's a pretty decent morning here in Portland too.
I miss it a bit.
How can you not?
Yeah, truthfully. So, one of the reasons we're talking about horror and suspense in RPGs is because you have an upcoming game people can get in on.
That is true.
Do you want to
Very,
tell
very
us
true.
a bit about that?
Yeah, so through Crumbling Keep, we are going to be running what we are calling Hunted in Barovia, which is going to be a special one shot that I've written that takes place in Barovia. And it's going to be a very much horror heavy game, very kind of brutal heavy metal if you're into that kind of thing. There's going to be some twists and turns, and I've got a lot of really fun things planned.
Awesome, awesome. So that's going to be on Saturday, April 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. There's a link in the video description for anyone that's interested. And I gotta tell you, when you first started telling me about the premise for this game, uh, it was almost like the suspense was built right in, right? Like one of the things suspense does is it leaves you wanting more. Like suspense
Yeah.
isn't about what it gives you, it's about what it doesn't. And when you told me the premise for the game, I'm like, I want to know how that ends. And when I've told anyone else about it, they've had similar like things like, "Oh, that sounds
Awesome.
yeah, yeah."
Good.
So,
And I'm even more excited because I've even come up with a few other things to kind of throw in there that I think is going to make it a lot of fun.
oh man. So again, that's suspense. We got a
Hmm.
teaser, but we don't know what those things are, so we want more
Hmm.
of that. So let's apply that to RPGs, right? Uh, I want to tell a little story real quick
Sure.
of being like, I don't know, I must have been like 12, 13, something like that. Back in the day when Ravenloft first came out for second edition. So, uh, being the edgy teen or close to it that I was, like, I grabbed the Ravenloft box set and I was so excited to run my first horror type campaign. And I
Of
read
course.
about how the mists come in and steal you away, you know.
Uh
Uh, it was terrible. No one had fun. No one had fun at all.
huh. Why is that? Why did nobody have fun?
Well, I feel like I learned a lot since then, but one of the things I didn't know was how to do horror and suspense. Like,
Okay.
it's got to be in a genre like role playing games. You have to have more than just shock value, right?
Hmm.
Like gore can only get you so far,
Yeah.
and I think that's definitely one of the things I learned. Was sometimes it's not what happens on camera, but it's what happens off camera. So let's
Totally.
like go back in time and say you're talking to my like younger self. What are you gonna tell me so I don't repeat that travesty?
Okay, so like you said, with suspense, you're kind of wanting people to feel like on the edge of their seat. You want them to feel anxious. You want them to feel uh for lack of a better word, kind of paranoid.
Yeah.
And uh to do that, unknown, like you said earlier, the unknown is kind of what drives suspense, like the fear of what, not knowing what's coming. Um and just having things kind of like hidden in the background that players aren't really seeing is a good way to kind of like build that. Um, I would say probably key to also building suspense is pacing. The way you time everything. It's you want to kind of like keep things moving, and not just like with like trying to rush your players and like keep the game going, but you want to just continually build that sense of whatever it is you're trying to convey. If you're trying to build fear, if you're trying to build loneliness or despair, you want to keep that moving by, if anytime you see like your players kind of like maybe lolling out on their conversation, maybe just slip in a description of what's going on around them. Say they're standing in a cemetery and they kind of get quiet as they're figuring out what they're doing, and you notice that. So you say, and as you guys stand there, you can feel the fog rolling in, and it sweeps around your ankles, and you hear the rustle of the wind blowing leaves across the yard.
Oh,
You
man.
can't help but feel like you're being watched.
That is so good.
That kind of thing. You want to consistently drive the point home of whatever kind of feeling you're wanting them to feel.
You know what that reminds me of, in a sense, is like when you're watching a good suspenseful horror movie and they have the soundtrack that is like mildly discomforting at first, and it keeps building and building, and people have those Pavlovian cues, right?
Yeah.
Like the fog's rolling in, the wind is rustling. Like those two things aren't threatening. Like no one has been killed, as far as I directly know, by fog. And like, unless it's like a hurricane force wind, I doubt the same for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's what it portends. Like it's what, as a person who has been exposed to media in their life, you see those things, and that means something worse is coming. And those are like the clues you're putting in there.
Yeah, and you don't know when. Yeah, it's just kind of like I said, yeah, driving home that sense of whatever feeling you're trying to make them feel.
I love that. I think like Stranger Things season 1, I think also did that really well. If you think how long it took you to actually see the monster,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it was most of the way through the season before you ever got an eyeball on that thing. It was
Yeah, and the whole
just-
time you're guessing, what does it look like? What does it look like?
Yeah.
Especially seeing the things it's doing and like the places they're going. Your mind just starts to race and wander.
And anyone with anxiety knows whatever you're thinking is going to be worse than what it actually is. And that's where the true terror lies.
And no matter what you're thinking, it's always going to be different. No matter what you were expecting, it's going to be something else. Or at least if you're doing your job properly, that's how it should be.
I think it's one of the cool things about RPGs too, is you can always adjust on the fly. So,
Mm-hmm.
And there's times for it to be like, the players think it's going to be thing. It's time to give them that kind of win and give them that confirmation. But there's also times where it'd be like, okay, I can switch this now because they just vocalized out loud.
Yeah.
So, do you have specific ways that you're kind of taking these tools and working it into the adventure you're writing for this? Well,
Yeah, I kind of just like try and keep that in mind as I was like putting my outline together. And as I'm putting the outline together, I'm trying to think of like specific points where I would be like, okay, and this is where I want to like, I want them to feel just absolute loneliness as they're walking down this trail, or, as they're walking through the city streets, they can't help but feel just eyes upon them everywhere they go. You want to try and keep the feelings that you're in mind with what they're doing and how you're going to drive that feeling home.
yes. I think that's also another good element you mentioned there is, you're kind of playing off that loneliness. That seclusion is classic. Like, there's a reason so many horror movies take place in like inaccessible locations,
Mm-hmm.
or like your cell phone suddenly doesn't work. That feeling cut off from the greater safety
Feeling
net.
helpless.
Yeah, like it's on you, and well, that's probably not going to end well. So that's also another really good one too. That's good stuff. And I think like as far as suspense, I think there's also ways to kind of apply that in non-horror settings as well. Like suspense is such a fantastic tool for
Yeah.
horror games, but at the same time, like even just think of clickbait articles. You'll never believe what they say, and that creates that suspense as well. That once makes you want to click on this stupid thing and waste your time with it.
Yeah.
So I'm saying if you have a stupid adventure with good suspense, you can get through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but one of the ways I like to do that is a lot of times, no matter what kind of adventure I'm writing, I like to think of it like a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
In sense of like there is a plot that the players are not fully aware of when they start, and getting those little clues, getting those little bite-sized morsels, just makes them want to find the next one that much more, because none of them give the whole story until it does. In the
Yeah,
culmination,
That's kind of a good point. I've never really thought about it like that, but as you're kind of like putting together a game, yeah, you kind of can just think about the entire thing as a bit of a mystery, especially if you're doing like a full like long campaign, because you are just kind of like wanting to just introduce little bits as they go, so they're not getting everything all at once.
Right, and that's, as you said about pacing, that is another big thing in pacing too, is trying to figure out how to parcel out that information. I'm running a game on Thursday nights where there's like this big bad who they've been hearing about for a while, and they know they're heading toward him. And just last night, they were in a tower and came upon this mirror, and this shape appeared in the mirror and started talking to them before realizing it wasn't who they were supposed to be contacting, and then just stopped and was like, oh, you're the ones looking for me. And there's this great moment where none of them knew what to say, because it's been months now we've been talking about the Cinder King, which I didn't know was a character elsewhere. Don't yell at me.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, right? And like, I can't change it now.
Yeah, it's a little late.
But they actually had like about 10 words with the Cinder King, and it had such great impact. So yeah, pacing, like you said, pacing for suspense. You got to give them enough to keep going, right? You can't just like...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like little breadcrumbs is what...
Yeah, you want to tease it. Yeah, I ran my Descent into Avernus game last night, and they had a really fun part of their session where I got to kind of play on that sense of dread and suspense. And they're driving through Avernus in one of the new vehicles that they just stole. And they come to this like rocky ravine where they see kind of like tucked away at the end of it, this wall of rock that rises up upon the edge of these mountains. But there's this giant slab of ice just sticking out of it. And they're like, this is hell. That's fucking weird. We're going to go look at that. And so of course,
like you do,
yeah, exactly. As adventurers do. And they drive down there and they park, and as they park, they pull up and they see the slab of ice is not just a slab of ice, but you can kind of see through it. And on the other side of it, you can see just another wasteland, but this one is just like this frozen tundra. And so cool. As they get out of the vehicles and walk up, they see their reflections in the ice, and they look like they're completely frostbitten and like covered in rime as they approach the block of ice. And as they see their reflections all decrepit like that, they have to make some saves, and every single one of them except one player failed, at which point they were all stunned and couldn't move. They were all frozen in place out of fear from seeing themselves like basically frostbitten and dead. And so there's this fun scene where the druid is like just looking around. He's like trying to shake people awake. Nobody's reacting. And he just sees himself walking around in this frozen wasteland on the other side of this mirror.
Oh, that's
so good. So he has this full minute where he's just there by himself, and the party can't do anything. They can't speak. They can't move. And so he has this like little flip out moment and right as he's just about to lose his shit, everybody comes back and they start moving and talking again.
Okay, so I would love to dissect that, because that was full of really good little nuggets there. There's some clues in there, right? They see themselves frozen on the other side. Like, what they see in that other side are clues. What are they clues for? They don't know, and that's what builds that suspense, right?
Exactly.
Like, they feel like there's something they are supposed to be getting, and something they can get there, like something they can understand, like it's leading to a thing. And if it is or it isn't, they still feel that way, so they're trying to put that information together, right? But then that pacing you just described was fantastic, and pacing can be used in so many ways. Like, anyone that was just listening to Dix talk there, just the inflection in your voice, the way it raised, like, even like, it seemed more frantic as you went along. You were taking me along on that journey just with like the storytelling you had in your voice. But aside from that, like, they see the ice. This is pretty benign at this point, right? They want to know what's going on. So that's kind of like the start. They go to the ice. They see themselves in it, frostbitten. Like, okay, that's increasing the pace at this point. They make the saves. Most of them can't move. That's increasing the pace at this point. You keep the pressure on while, was it a druid that didn't? Is that what you said?
Yep.
Well, the druid is wandering around trying to figure out what just happened, what to do, how to shake their friends loose. Like, nothing's working. And, like, if you leave that just as it is, that's going to be like a falling action, right? Like, they're just going to kind of get frustrated. But you kept that pace going with, like, descriptions and, like, kind of like throwing out those breadcrumbs as you went until boom, it was done. So that just built up to like a great crescendo that you finished really well, and that is like, yeah. I mean, that I was gonna say that's not necessarily horror, but like no, that's kind of scary, you know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and then they get the payoff afterwards where
yes.
they're standing there after like they come out of it. The rest of the team has no idea that they were just frozen in place for a minute. They just feel like they've been there. And so they find out what's happened. They kind of have like a mini panic attack because they don't feel like that's what happened. And then as they're kind of sitting there figuring out whether they should like get the hell out of Dodge or not, they see this tower off in the distance as a winged figure leaves from one of the top parapets and begins to fly towards them.
And after what just happened, that's an alarm.
They shit their pants. They just immediately hop in their vehicles. They're like, we get the fuck out of here right now. We drive away as fast as we can. And so they see that as they drive away, the druid's like, no, I keep an eye on that slab of ice as we drive. And as they're driving out of the ravine, they see this figure get closer and closer. And right as it lands, they see this humanoid figure with wings and blue skin just staring at them as they drive away and turn around the corner.
Oh yeah, nope, right the hell out of there. No.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. I'm running a Theros campaign, and this week they found this shipwrecked, a shipwreck, and the crew from the ship was not that far from the sea. They were in Hunter's Landing, I think it's called. Anyway, that part's not really important, but they couldn't move on from there because the priest that was with them was swearing that they were having nightmares that were portending horrible things to come, and they need to stay there and prepare. And no one looks like they slept for a while. Like, and that's the first thing they saw when they got to land and saw these people. Like, everyone was walking around like zombies.
Huh.
Everyone looked like they haven't slept for a while. Exactly. Huh. Like, something's happening there, right?
Yeah.
Like, you start with your hook, right? You start with your, like, obvious to let people know something is happening or something is coming. And then you can build off of that, right? So, at that point, they're confused. They're going around asking people, like, they're trying to figure out what's going on. They hear about the nightmares. And their task isn't necessarily clear at that point. The, like, how do we fix this isn't necessarily there. So, have them do a perception check. They spot a young girl looking at them from, like, the outskirts of camp. And one of them's like, well, that's an obvious, like, glowing NPC get quest here thing.
Yeah, quest marker appears above the head.
right. Little exclamation point above this little girl. And they go talk to her, and she's like, oh, I'm not supposed to. My mommy and daddy told me not to tell lies, but I saw someone walking around camp at night. Okay, so obviously that has to do with it, right?
Yeah, right.
So
not weird at all.
To, like, split up and watch the different sections of camp. Now, what was happening, and what they didn't know at the time, is it was a night hag that was causing nightmares. And just kind of feeding off that misery like night hags
as they do.
So they split up into different parts of the camp, and like they all kind of suspected it might be someone who is part of the camp, and I gave them a bunch of NPC names with like little descriptions of personality, and
okay,
if you give people tools, they're going to use them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So while they were all split up, different people in different parts of the camp started to get up. Like, most of them were, like, red herrings. You know, one got up to go to the bathroom, and someone tried to follow them stealthily, not knowing that, and failed their stealth roll. And so the person, like, was looking over their shoulder the whole time, and then went to a tree, and got their knife out and cut off a branch, and then, like, bent down. And when they came up, they had tied their knife to the branch, and were like, I don't know who's there, but we're going to have a problem. So then they had to talk them down. It's like, I just want to pee. But by the time they got back, someone else was missing. Meanwhile, across on the other side of camp, since the hag can turn ethereal, someone sees, like, I had them roll a perception check because it was dark, and since they didn't do well, I just explained it like a cloud was coming through this wall. And so they thought it was some kind of, like, mist that was causing it, and they used gust of wind, and it didn't clear it. And so those, like, clues kind of kept building up. Until eventually someone's like, wait, Heartstone, hag, nightmares. And then Paladin used Where's the Fiend, and it kind of ended quick after that. But, yeah, like, little clues, little bits of misdirection, I think can do well in building Suspense as well, and I think that does a lot
Hmm.
more for player attention than like everyone loves to just kill things. Don't get me wrong,
True.
but that's what people are going to talk about. Probably not what they killed, but what they figured out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and misdirection, that word right there alone, it can be huge in building suspense. Having the players thinking that they're on the right path and finding out what they're looking for and then figuring out they have no fucking clue. It's great.
Yeah, and then they want to know. They will come back
They
again.
want to know even harder.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just going to sink that seed even deeper into their minds, and they're not going to be able to let it go after that.
So let's talk a little bit about Hunted in Barovia. For
Mm-hmm.
anyone just tuning in, that is happening on Saturday, April 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 Pacific. We have some open chairs in that game, and Dix is going to be running it. So, what is like what's the premise behind the plot? Like, what's the quick pitch for the uninitiated?
So the quick pitch would be that you are all already in Barovia. For whatever reasons, your characters would find themselves there, whether you're locals or you decide that you guys want to be an adventuring party that has found your way there. But you end up finding yourselves in the city of Valaki. And while you were there, there is essentially an attack that happens in a part of the town, and a number of townsfolk are murdered. And in response, a few of the locals decide to head up a hunting party to go search for whatever beasts or people were responsible for it. And you are recruited to join them and are taken outside the safety of the city walls to go look for whatever monstrous entity has attacked the city.
I love that there's mystery just built right in there. Like, just again from that description, the suspense is there, and it just makes me want to. I want to know what is causing this. Which is fantastic. And I think that when it comes to suspense and horror, obviously in D&D, there's no better place than Ravenloft, right?
Of course. Of course.
Super excited for that new release to come out.
Oh yes, the book is going to be great. I'm excited to customize Ravenloft even further.
So I talked a little bit about my first run-in, my first tragic run-in with Ravenloft. What about yourself? How did you get it
So
initiated?
Ravenloft was actually also my introduction to D&D. My first D&D game was actually Curse of Strahd in 5th edition.
Cool.
Yeah, so I'm really familiar.
Yeah,
But
that's a hell of a way to start. Like,
it
that
was,
just
yeah.
takes all the classic tropes you expect, and it's like, meh, sexy
Yeah,
vampire. You
it was
know?
great too because when I joined this group, I originally sat in to just kind of get a feel for the group, and they were actually doing a random one shot that had nothing to do with this game. And then I was like, okay, yeah, this sounds fun. I'll join. And then my first session was the entire party getting introduced to Barovia. Uh, as we are brought to the Vistani camp at the very beginning, and you are like, everything's laid out. And I was just like, oh shit, this is not what I thought we were getting into, but I'm here for it. And
Totally.
yeah, and I remember falling in love with it when the group first makes it to Barovia, and you're just walking around and everything just seems like absolute shit there. Everybody's depressed. Nobody wants to come out of their homes. Nobody wants to even fucking look at you.
2020, everybody. We made it through that. Okay.
And it just, the whole vibe I totally meshed with. I'm like all about horror and suspense, and didn't realize that that's kind of like what I was getting into at first. And I was so stoked. And there's this encounter in town where you just kind of like hear crying like ringing out through the streets. And so of course our groups goes to investigate it, and we just end up finding all these creepy things as we're going through this house. And just the whole session was just fantastic with how creepy my DM made it set in, and I just fell in love.
Oh, that's
I
a
was
really
hooked.
good story. That's a great
Yeah.
story. And again, that suspense built in right from the beginning. That's so interesting. Because I just feel like, I mean, there's definitely a good few campaign worlds that really depart from the standard fantasy trope at this point, like Eberron and everything. But like,
Mhm.
yeah, Ravenloft does it in a very specific way, in a really fun way. And so like, I can just imagine like going from that one shot, and I want to imagine there was like goblins and dragons, and then finding yourself in Barovia, wading through
Yeah,
the
they
muck in
were
the street.
Yeah, they were in like the one shot. They were in like your typical dungeon, and just fighting like random dungeon monsters, and then like finding us like walking through this mist and finding this Vishtani camp, like and all of that we did, and being like I think our first night we were chased by a bunch of blights like through the woods, and it was fucking great. I loved it.
That's so good. That's not your like power fantasy heroic game there.
No.
It's a different thing.
But
and,
I was so about it.
yeah, totally. I mean, like, everyone has fun their own way. Not to like put down power fantasy gaming, do your thing. But I think a lot of times it's seen as the only thing in the default, so it's cool to like see that out there.
Yeah.
And I've told this story a few times. I've maybe even told on Help Action. I'm not sure. But just kind of put in a new frame when I think about my first D&D game and how the suspense was in there. That really hooked me for life.
Yeah.
The most visual thing that I remember is like my first run-in with a gelatinous cube, and I never read a monster manual. I didn't know what it was, but it just looked like this cube of jelly, and inside was floating a sword and a ring. And there's this great tension that was created of like, okay, obviously the stuff inside is bait, right? Mm-hmm. Which probably means it's cool and I want to touch it, but that would mean reaching inside of this glob of jelly that's floating around, and I don't know what it does. And
you have no idea what it does. Yeah, right, the unknown.
Right, exactly. It was completely unknown, but the clues were there. Like there was stuff inside of it. There was a skeleton, I think, inside of it too. Like,
of course,
like enough for me to be like, okay, these are all signs of bad things. Like, but I want the pretties, but also, so
the choices.
Yeah, just getting the unknown in there is great for tension.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, yeah. You have any more thoughts on that?
So one thing I also try to do with like, especially my horror themed games, is I try to make it somewhat personal for the players. Beforehand, before any of my horror games, I'll go through and I'll ask my players not only what are their characters afraid of, but what they're afraid of. And I try to do this respectfully and ask like, how far would you be willing to let me go with that in the game? What would you be comfortable with? But finding out what people are actually like really afraid of in real life and using that in the game when they don't expect it can be a really good tool as well. And again, doing that respectfully and not going over anybody's boundaries, but it can be great, especially when, like you said, when you're using misdirection and that's not something that they were expecting.
That's awesome. And yeah, as far as like Crumble and Keep games go, we always have the safety forms we send out first to like, because, there's a big difference between the horror you're willingly consent to, which like if you want a horror movie or a horror game or something like that, there's some horror you want, right? And the stuff that you're like, no, this crosses the line for me. So we always make sure we figure that out beforehand, so no one's going to get anything like unwanted sprung on them. But give us the green light, and we're going to poke that button a bit.
Yeah. We actually just released a new episode of Help Action today. Go check it out. But we actually discussed that in part of it, where somebody had said that they had a DM who had asked them all like that same question, like what they're scared of in real life, so that they could use it in the game. But he apparently has been using it to the point to like have people cause people panic attacks at the table, and like it's gotten bad enough to where they're saying that people are making up excuses to not show up for the game because he's basically just using it to like traumatize them.
Oh, that is a bad gaming situation. That's a nightmare gaming situation.
Yeah, that's not fun for anybody. It just because you're having fun, like torturing your players, like that's not a good look. Don't do that.
Totally. Yeah, there's a responsible way to do it, and that is not it. That is totally not it. Okay, so I don't feel like it'd be a stream without you if I wasn't like, hey, Dix, tell us about the best podcast that folks might not be listening to.
Hey, yeah. Help Action. If you haven't heard of it yet, check it out. It's my podcast that I do with a couple other DMs, and we spend every other week trying to basically just not make people better, help people have better tools for their games. We talk about new products, and we share our experiences and stories and answer questions that people submit so that we can help everybody have a better time at the table.
I will sincerely, like, what I'm about to say is very sincere. There are 2 RPG podcasts only that I listen to on the regular, maybe 2.5. Um, and to be fair, like, I'm not much into actual plays. I'll listen to them for a while, and then I'll like get behind, and I'm like get distracted by other things.
Yeah, it's like missing your own campaign.
Right,
It's easy to fall behind.
Totally, and then I'm just like, everyone's a higher level than me. But yeah, every 2 weeks when it comes out, I always check out Help Action, and like I swear it's at the same time. I have headphones on. I'm making dinner, and my wife wants to know what the fuck I'm laughing at because y'all kill me. It's great, and yeah, it's also really informative and just super entertaining. I know it's cost me some money from some of the stuff that you have brought up on the show and some of the Kickstarters and everything. I'm like, well, great. I need that now. Okay.
Yeah. I get that. Well, thank you though. We appreciate it. We have a blast making it.
That's it. It shows. It really shows. And yeah, the few times I've been a guest, it's felt that way as well.
Good. I'm glad.
So, in closing, Hunted in Barovia. This is the game that DM Dix is going to be running.
Hell yeah. Come join us.
DM Dix is one of the fantastic professional DMs that we have at Crumbling Keep. And yeah, if you need a... that's what I'm looking for. Basically, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Listen to Help Action and listen to him describe his games. You just have like a natural storyteller presence. And like, after working at a game store for many years, I generally don't want to hear people talk about their games. Like, no offense to anyone, but I'm just like...
But I just hear it all the time. Much. Yeah.
Dude, I love listening to you talk about, like, Descent into Avernus or...
thanks, man.
What's the bard music group again?
Guano.
How can I forget Guano? Yeah, or Guano. But anyway, running Hunted in Barovia, Saturday, April 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. Pacific. There is a link in the video description. Check it out. Get a table for that. Let us know what you're afraid of, and come on down to Barovia with Dix.
Fuck yeah.
It's going to be my tagline. Come on down to Barovia with Dix.
Dix included.
More Dix. Awesome. Well, we hope to see you there, folks.